What I'm going to present is actually an outcome of a work of not only me, but of 4 authors. And the first one is Adriana Mika, who also happens to be organizer of this workshop, but it is also work of Anna Horolec and Paweł Kubicki. And what I'm going to present, well, I'm not going to present a book, but it's very much built on 2 chapters of the book, which we just learned last week, that was moved into production in the same series as Nora's book, Routledge Research in Ignorance Studies. It's going to be titled Ignorance and Change, Anticipatory Knowledge, and the European Refugee Crisis. And the book is an outcome of the research project we actually started in 2015, when so-called refugee crisis started in Europe. I will later tell you why we say so-called crisis, because it's an important part of our research, how where we are tackling how the certain event is constructed as a crisis or something else, or it is contested not to be a crisis, or it has to. Some actors claim that it should be called otherwise. Okay, so the structure of the presentation is, first I will tell you just a bit about ignorance studies, how we are perceiving it. It was already very much presented by Nora in her presentation. And then I will tell you about our research context. Then I will theorize a bit about crises, how important the anticipatory knowledge and belief that crisis leads to change is important when the crises are constructed. And then I will give you some snapshots of the results of our study, which hopefully will lead us to some conclusions about the connections between ignorance, policy, crises, knowledge, yes, and this interplay between knowledge and ignorance. So yeah, ignorance studies is becoming a thing for the last 10 years or so. But the problem is that it's really hard to provide a proper definition of ignorance. Yes, right? If you define what ignorance is, then actually it's not an ignorance. So when I think what ignorance is, I like this analogy of black matter from astrophysics or whatever. I'm not expert in astrophysics, but it's something which is not a matter. So ignorance is not a knowledge. Yes, in very common sense belief, ignorance is a kind of anti-knowledge, but actually it's a twin of it. It always goes together with knowledge. And so actually, as much we expand our knowledge, we also expand our ignorance. And what we believe and what's our contribution to theorize about ignorance is that so far, ignorance studies were very much preoccupied with all sorts of categorizations or taxonomies of ignorance. So what is the difference between known unknowns and unknown unknowns? There were new terms introduced like unknown knowns and so on. Yeah. Of course, Lindsay McGee brought this very powerful notion of strategic ignorance, which was already discussed by Nora, how actors purposively deal with ignorance of other actors or present themselves as not knowing something. In our approach, we would prefer to focus, to make like a new step to focus on what ignorance does. Not what ignorance is, but what ignorance does, how it is interacting with other social processes, how it is mobilized in a situation of crisis, and how projecting the future involves ignoring alternative courses of the future. So our research context is, as I said, so-called 2015 European refugee crisis and its aftermath, but we focus on 3 countries from the Central Eastern Europe, Hungary, Poland, and Romania. In both countries, we made media content analysis. Here are the details. I'm not going to go into details, what period, what outlets we were analyzing, but we're looking for the media representations of refugees and the crisis. We also analyzed policy documents because it was a hot debate between the member states and the European Union institutions, as beautifully presented in Natasha's Only this discussion about reforming common European asylum system is going on for many years, but this period gave it a new momentum. And we also in each of the 3 countries conducted interviews with key actors for the local or national, let's say, asylum policy field. So there were not people making decisions on the ministerial level. There are also not people actually working directly with refugees. Also, in some cases there were, but rather the people in the middle of the hierarchy. Yeah, so people employed with expert knowledge, analyzing documents, translating the political decisions in the actual policy implementation. What's interesting in these 3 countries, obviously Hungary was a country through which quite a large number of refugees in 2015 walked through or traveled by other means of transportation. It was part of so-called Balkan route. Poland was not a scene of any events. Romania was at some point preparing, because there was a short period when people believed that people were not only crossing the Mediterranean Sea, but there will be another route from Turkey through Black Sea established. But actually Poland and Romania were involved in the crisis situation only as a member states to which refugees were supposed to be relocated, thanks to the mechanism developed by the European Union institutions in order to manage a crisis somehow. And so different situation of these countries, but that's why we have, I think, quite strong evidence for in this ongoing debate if crisis is something real or if crisis is something socially constructed. In all these 3 countries, a lot of social actors believe that they're taking part in the crisis. Yes, even if the real events were quite far from them, thanks to the media construction of the situation, thanks to the political struggles, engagement of various actors, the crisis was actually perceived as something going on here also. Okay, let's have a short discussion about the key notions we are using. So crisis for us is a large-scale, unexpected event, which is perceived to be consequential. So what is very important in our definition of crisis is that usually during the crisis situation, people believe that after such a large-scale event, some large changes will come. And I think we can, if we resonate to the current situation of coronavirus pandemics, we have all these ongoing debates, how the economy or social life will look after it. And there is a huge production of these projections of the future. Yes, and it was, of course, on the smaller scale happening in 2015, especially in the field of asylum policy. There was a lot of production, how it's going to be reformed, how the social situation is going to change, how the policies regarding the migration in European countries needs to be different. And so we call this, after Miche, this preoccupation with projections about the future, hyper-projectivity, and crises are sides of a hyper-projectivity. So all people in the modern era are preoccupied with the future, but crisis is a moment which when we are even more thinking about how the future is going to look like. And what we found out, and that's the notion we are bringing to this discussion, is that quite often some of these projections of future are becoming reified. Yes, we are in the current situation, but we construct the future we believe is going to be certain. And it allows us to ignore other projections, other possible alternative futures. The reification of future also has this even emotional component. It allows political mobilization. Yes, so sometimes we see future which is reified, and it is used by populist politicians in order to fearmonger and say, we have to do everything to avoid this kind of future. Or sometimes the future, when it becomes so institutionalized, people do not see any alternative for it. It is taken for granted, and all the social actors are implementing this future. So it a bit resembles the mechanism of self-fulfilling prophecy as defined by Robert Merton many years ago. Okay, so let's go to the empirical part. What's a bit contrary to what we see in the literature on framing refugees in our studies, that in many studies it is shown that representation of refugees, and especially the refugee crisis by media, was creating more confusion, ambiguity, and dissonance. And actually we have this perspective that it's not only, well, partially of course it is producing confusion, but it's also producing some certainty and neglecting the uncertainty. It's providing reified projections how the future is going to look like. Sometimes the future, of course, is going to be these dark scenarios, especially in Hungary and Poland in 2015, very much the fact that in Western European countries, the terrorist attack was associated with the refugees crossing the Mediterranean Sea. So it was constructed as a common phenomena under this umbrella of a refugee crisis. So this is what we found in the analysis of media in Poland, Romania, and Hungary, that actually media, together with politicians who were present in media outlets, were producing the belief how the future will look like, or how it very probably would look like, and it's calling for some action to do something about this future. And just one example, because with content media analysis, it's always risky to get into the details. A bit of a context: this gentleman is a prominent Polish politician, believed to be one of the spin doctors of the party which is now ruling our country. And this statement was given just 1 month before the election. And he was very much involved in fear-mongering about the possible threats of refugees coming to Poland. And of course, in his production of a future, according to which at some point, as a consequence of the European Union projects to relocate refugees, there will be 500,000 of people in Poland coming from Middle East. There were some grammatical devices saying it would be, it's possible, but on the other hand, the whole construction is giving you numbers, is providing you even with the laws, let's say laws about multiplication of people and so on. So of course, this is just to illustrate, but that kind of a discourse was producing how the future is going to look like, and it created a condition for the policy action of various institutions which were supposed to manage the crisis, or were simply managing the, let's say, regular inflows of refugees to Poland. This table is also a bit complicated, but it's the purpose of showing it to you is to say that before the so-called crisis, the asylum policies, and it resonates with what was presented by Natasha, was run in the 3 countries in the shadows. Actually, no one was interested. It was not a topic of the public debate. Poland, Hungary, and Romania were, as you called it, fence-sitters. Yes, and of course, there was a lot of expert knowledge produced about it in the field, but it was not reaching the level of interest even of a vice minister or so on. But the crisis revealed the phenomena, and the fact that it was constructed as a crisis made the changes in the policies. Even if the details of the policies were not changed, the organizations implementing them, they had to adjust to the new reified futures and start changing their actions. So Poland behaved in a very tricky way. It never formally abandoned the system of relocation of refugees, but it never fulfilled its pledges. Hungary openly contested the system, and Romania was accepting the system, although it accepted quite small number of refugees. But as in Romania, the story became mediatized, but it never became politicized. It was not an issue of a political conflict. So they continue their role as a fence-sitter. Yes, but the Poland and Hungary changed their position, and yes, now we can. I like this name, feed draggers. Yes, feed draggers. Is it I hope that I remembered correctly. Yes, so they used the situation on the political level of European debates to become more active and to present them as agenting in somehow present them as agenting in drafting the European policy. Also, although this presenting of being agenting was mostly targeting the internal audiences. Okay, so this is how the situation changed, and it was connected with the playing with ignoring and knowing about the future. What we know from the interviews with the participants of the three national asylum systems, ignorance affects the processes of projection and anticipatory knowledge. So that there are this reified future, or the futures which are believed to be very likely, and there are also these unattainable futures. And they are, in our case, they were produced by the experts or practitioners of the field who were believing how the future action might turn out, but due to the mechanisms of production of ignorance on the field level or also on the level of the public debate, there were silence, and the knowledge how to accommodate refugees coming to Hungary, or how to accommodate the refugees if they would be relocated to Poland, never left the organizations which are involved in the field. Yes, there were also employed some more drastic tools in order to silence some organizations. In case of Hungary and Poland, it was the cutting the finance for non-governmental organizations who are not only helping the refugees, but they were also representing the voice of refugee welcome. Yes, so the real material action which is leading to ignorance, simply cutting the resources for someone who is producing the alternative knowledge. So what we knew before, it's an element from which we construct the future, but also what we ignored now and what we are ignoring in the past is an element of the construction, how we are going to believe the future course of action is going to look like. And the dynamics of these three elements always involves ignoring and knowing, and is consequential for how the situation is going to look like. So to conclude this short presentation, some of the conclusions are really, let's say, trivial. So yes, crises are socially constructed. You can believe that you're in the middle of the crisis, even if the events are not happening here. And of course, I'm not saying that the people were not suffering or not crossing the sea, but when we talk about social construction, we talk about the frames used by media to present it, and the narratives, and all these linguistic tools in order, thanks to which we discuss about certain situation. Crises are signs of hyper-projectivity, so it's the moment when we really believe that something huge is going to happen. And maybe one important remark, after the crises fade away or stop happening, where actors notice that there is no real change, yes, they start contesting the fact that there was a crisis before. And I think we are also in that situation, yes, because the common asylum European system actually was not changed so much. Everyone in the 2015 was believing we are finished with Dublin system, we need some new formula. And now you see, and was presented by Natasha in beautiful details, that there are still going discussions about crafting some details, but we also started believing that there was no real crisis. There were some events, dramatic events, but and this is that retrospective reconstructing the crisis situation as not a crisis, because we do not see any, let's say, real change, but the changes are there. Yes, this is only our expectation that crisis as a huge event is going to bring a huge event. Yes. Sometimes they're bringing just small events. And also what is small and what is large event is also a subject of social construction. Projecting the future involves ignoring alternative futures. So it is quite complicated process of social construction of knowledge, and this is very interesting kind of knowledge, because it's not a knowledge about something which is there, but which is knowledge about something which is going to be there. But the future which finally becomes reified sets conditions for action, and then yes, this discussion about what is going to be, it's changing the behaviors and actions of the real actors. And finally, individual knowledge, especially the knowledge of experts, is not enough to be translated into the collective knowledge. And I think it's on the applicative level, very important recommendation for people who study migration and all other phenomena who would like to inform decision makers. Yes, we do not have only to know about the phenomena and the social mechanisms we study, but we also need to know about the mechanism of transmission of knowledge and construction of knowledge as valuable or valid knowledge. Yes. It's not important there's so many experts knowing a lot about refugees. It's important that they will use the windows of opportunity together with policymakers, maybe social movements, in order to translate them for political action and make the knowledge receive the status of the common knowledge. Okay, thank you so much.